Well, it only seemed like 20 years, but it actually was 30 years. I know I just look a lot younger than people think I am, see. But I spent 30 years in Congress. I hope all of you get a chance to read this. The Washington Times published this, and it's on all of your desks. And it brings back a lot of memories for me, because when I was first elected, Ronald Reagan was the President of the United States, and he'd been in office about 2 years. And one of the things that we were concerned about was the spread of communism in Central and South America. And Ronald Reagan was a crusader against communism, like Reverend Moon. And I think that a lot of the things Reverend Moon said that you'll read in this document is things that Ronald Reagan picked up on. In particular, one thing I noticed was when he said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Reverend Moon had said that before. I didn't know that before today. But I hope you get a chance to take a look at this. It's very, very interesting. When I first met Ronald Reagan and we started fighting the communism in Central and South America, we were trying to stop the communist FMLN in El Salvador from taking over that country. And we were trying to stop the communist Sandinistas by supporting the Contras, freedom fighters, in Nicaragua. And it was a very difficult fight because in Congress there were a lot of members that didn't want us to be involved in anything like stopping that communist movement in Central and South America. Fidel Castro had sent Che Guevara down to South America where he was killed, and they were continuing to spread communism as rapidly as possible, not only in Central and South America, but in other parts of the world as well. In Africa, in Angola, they had 38,000 communist Cuban troops there trying to help spread communism. So it was a great battle. And a heroic figure like Reverend Moon was essential, in my opinion, in the fight to stop communism. He started the Washington Times, and I think that had a lot to do with changing the attitude of a lot of people in the Western Hemisphere and in Congress. And as a result, we ultimately were able to prevail and stop the communist movement in Central America. We ended up with democracies flourishing in many of the countries that had been communist dictatorships. And it was because of the crusaders like Reverend Moon and Ronald Reagan that that was accomplished. But the fight goes on today. It's a different fight than we had back then. President Gorbachev in Russia wants to expand his control over the old Soviet Union once again. He's trying to move into the Ukraine, and I was chairman of Europe and Eurasia the last 2 years I was in Congress, and there's definitely a fear among many of the Eurasian countries that communism is on the rise again, in particular because of the expansionist policies of President Putin. So we still have that problem. But in Central and South America, which is a subject that I should be talking about right now, is the problem is not necessarily communism, although we still have that threat. In Venezuela, we had Chavez down there, who was a communist supporter and believer. And we have others in other parts of Central and South America that believes in that. But we also have the fight of dealing with the expansion of narcotics that are coming across the borders of these countries. And the people who are selling these narcotics are making millions and billions of dollars. In fact, I've been told there are rooms filled with money to such a degree that they have to worry about the rats eating the money before they can launder it through the banks and so forth around this world. So it's a very lucrative business. And as a result, it's spreading terrorism in Central and South America. If you watch what's going on in Mexico and Honduras and Guatemala, you see that there's a torrent of young people, children, that are coming to the United States. And many of these young people are being brought there by people who are trafficking in human beings. And they're also involved in the drug trade. And so the fight is not just against communism anymore, but it's a multifaceted fight that we have to deal with. And that's why religious persecution and fighting against things like the drug expansion in Central and South America and the rest of the world, and why it's important that we, as people who are here today, who believe in religious freedom and against persecution and terrorism, that we need to be actively involved. So I guess the message I'd like to give to all of my friends here today, because you're leaders from all over the world, is that when we leave here, we need to go back to our countries and we need to talk about these threats to freedom, democracy, and human rights. And it involves not just communism, which has always been a problem and continues to be a problem, not as bad as it was when Reverend Moon and Ronald Reagan was carrying the fight to the enemy, but it's still a threat. But today we have these other threats that are extremely important. Human trafficking doesn't just take place in Central and South America up through Mexico into the United States. It takes place in Africa. It takes place in Asia. It takes place all over the world. And we need to talk about that and talk to leaders throughout the world and tell them how important it is that we address those issues. Narcotics, which is a brother of these other terrible things that are going on, needs to be dealt with as well. And we need to tell our leaders that they need to have or redouble their efforts to deal with the drug trafficking and the terrible things that are happening. I see they're getting ready to get the hook out for me here. I saw the 2-minute sign. But you folks are leaders. You're people that have been invited here to participate in this forum because you're respected and admired around the world. And you're admired in your own countries. In fact, many of you are elected leaders who have served as presidents and legislators and other office holders throughout the entire world. And because of that, you have influence. And these kinds of forums are great to get together and talk about the problems. But once we leave here, those problems must be addressed. And the best way to address them is for people of your stature, all of you in this room, and the ones who aren't here. The people of your stature needs to tell their friends, neighbors, and governmental leaders who are currently in office, the fight goes on. The fight goes on against people like Putin, who's trying to expand the sphere of communism in Europe and in Eurasia. The fight goes on against the drug traffickers in Central and South America and around the world. And the fight goes on against those people who are trafficking in human beings and causing multitudes of misery. We have bodies that are being found in the rivers alongside the Mexican-American border of young children who are being brought up here, and there's no way to get them into the United States. And when they do get in, they're faced with more and more problems. So we need to carry that message here in the United States, and I hope all of you will carry that message back to your homes, your countries, and your districts, and tell all of your friends and neighbors and political leaders how important it is for us to carry on the fight for religious freedom and tolerance, because it's more important now than ever. Thank you very much.